wherever you are, as long as you're singing. So I'll now invite Mary Rothschild to begin our worship.
If you have a chalice, now's the time to bring it close. Please join me in saying our words to our chalice lighting words. We kindle this flame, symbol of our faith, for the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of love, which calls us to work for justice.
Good morning. I am Marcy Bowden. I'm your Director of Faith Formation Ministry here at Valley Unitarian Universalist. If you have any children or young people in the house who might want to be in front of the camera for our Time for All Ages story, now's the time to call them forward. In the meantime, a few announcements. So the Pastoral Care Associate today is Roz Hawkins. You can reach out to them via pastoralcare@vuu.org, or you can use the chat link. Just click on their name for a private message. A few other announcements today. East Valley UU is meeting this Thursday night at 6:30. The Green Sanctuary Garden Committee is meeting at 8 a.m. out in the garden on Thursday. And the Food for Life and Planet meeting, the FLP meeting, is Friday at 10 a.m. And you can, excuse me, refer to your happenings for more information and Zoom meetings. Please stay after the service today for the congregational conversation with the board. We will then have a breakout rooms available for socializing after the congregational conversation. So remember that members and friends and visitors are all welcome at the congregational conversation and at the breakout rooms. Your prompt today is to talk about a time when you met an unlikely prophet, and I'll put that in the chat for you. So our Time for All Ages today. This is a rich and evocative version of the Golden Rule that captures the importance and rewards of a rule that is simple, yet not always easy to follow.
The Golden Rule by Eileen Cooper, illustrated by Gabby Swatowska. A boy and his grandfather stood on a city sidewalk, looking up at the words printed on a billboard. "Grandpa, what does it say?" the boy asked. "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." People all over the world call those words the Golden Rule. What does it mean, the boy wanted to know, and why is it golden? It means this: treat people the way you would like to be treated. It's golden because it's so valuable and a way of living your life that's so simple, it shines. Grandfather led the boy to another billboard farther down the sidewalk. Some people put the Golden Rule another way: do nothing to other people that you would not like having done to you. Either way, he said, it's a very good rule. Who's it for? The boy asked. You, me, anyone can practice the Golden Rule. A rule that's the same for children and grown-ups? Same rule. There aren't too many rules like that. Very few. And it's for people everywhere? Everywhere. Whatever their religion, people find the idea of the Golden Rule in their holy books, Grandfather said. Christianity says you should love your neighbor as you love yourself. Judaism says, what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow humans. Islam says, hurt no one so that no one may hurt you. Hinduism says, this is the sum of duty, to do nothing to others which would cause them pain. Buddhism says, do not do to others what would hurt you. The Shawnee tribe says, do not kill or injure your neighbor, for it is not he or she that you injure yourself. The boy and his grandfather sat on a park bench. So, Grandpa, how can I start to practice the Golden Rule? You begin by using your imagination. My imagination? You imagine how someone else feels. For instance, a new child who is joining your class. How do you think that boy or girl is feeling? New kids always look scared. Would you be scared if it was you? Oh, yes. What would make you feel better? Well, if someone smiled at me. So to practice the golden rule, you would smile at a new kid? You've got it. I bet you can think of other ways you'd like to be treated and ways you wouldn't want to be treated. How do you feel when you're teased or bullied? Oh, sad. Yes. Mad. Yes. Small. I feel small. Sad, mad, small. Do you like feeling like that? No. Neither does anybody else. The boy thought for a moment about the golden rule. I see. There are lots of things I can do. I should tell the truth because I don't like being lied to. I want people to listen to me, so I should listen to other people. When I'm sick or when I'm tired, sometimes I need help, so I should offer my help to those who need it. You're getting the idea, Grandfather nodded. The boy looked at his grandfather. Practicing the golden rule seems like it can be hard. I said it was simple. I didn't say it would always be easy. Grandpa, the boy said, the golden rule is a very big thing, isn't it? Very big and very small and very old. It's been around for thousands of years. Thousands of years! Well then, I don't think everyone is practicing the way they should. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many problems between people, between countries. You're right, my boy. I wonder how things would change if everyone lived by the golden rule. I think people would be nicer, kinder. They'd act better toward their families and friends and even strangers. What if countries lived by the golden rule? Grandfather asked. Well, then people wouldn't want to hurt each other because they don't like being hurt. Maybe there wouldn't be wars. That would be wonderful, wouldn't it? Wonderful, Grandpa. But you can't make everyone in the world practice the golden rule. There's only one person you can ask to do that. Me? You. It begins with you.
What gift do we bring? That's what one of our hymns says. What gift do we bring? Though we ask for money, it is your gift as a person that creates this community. Together, those gifts can do so much. Amplify your faith, your hope, your love, your joy by adding your gift. And as you do, let's give a listen to Mary Rothschild as she brings our welcome for the morning.
Let's start with a hymn, actually.
Oh, sure, that's right. My mistake.
No worries. Good morning, everyone. My name is Katie Seifert, and I'm the Director of Music Ministries. And first, I want to say, if you love to sing and miss singing with others, especially with a choir, then I invite you to join in the fun and attend the virtual choir experience that I'm co-leading with Benji Messer, who is the music director from UUCP Central Phoenix. We will be meeting on Zoom for the next 3 Wednesdays from 7 to 8 p.m., learning Handel's iconic Hallelujah Chorus to debut on Easter morning. All are welcomed, and if you'd like more information, send me an email at musicdirector@vuu.org. Now let's sing together from our individual spaces. In lieu of Women History Month, I'll be selecting music throughout our services from various women composers and women musicians. For our first hymn, number 298 in our gray hymnal, if you have one, please join in singing with Lindley Wing. She's a singer and exceptional pianist from Star King Unitarian Universalist Church in Hayward, California. This beautiful hymn is called Wake Now My Senses.
Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being. reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now, compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor, both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end.
Good morning. I'm delighted to welcome you to Valley Unitarian Universalist Congregation, meeting as is our new normal on Zoom. My name is Mary Rothschild, and I'm your worship associate this morning. Whoever you are, however you define yourself, and wherever you are on your spiritual journey, we bid you welcome. And more than that, we're really glad you're here. This morning, Reverend Wooden was continuing his sermons on James Weldon Johnson's extraordinary poems, God's Trombones. And today he's considering Let My People Go, the Moses story of the Israelites fleeing from slavery. I reread Exodus for the first time in decades this week, and I'd frankly forgotten about most of us, Moses and the 10 Commandments, the golden calf, and how Moses had been saved by Pharaoh's daughter as a baby and raised. Mostly forgotten all of it, in other words, except the fleeing from Egypt and slavery and the parting of the Red Sea as Pharaoh and his troops came to kill them all. What I did remember is that God took care of them, that Moses led them to freedom, and that their escape from slavery was hard and dangerous. I think the reason I remembered that part of Exodus so vividly was a picture in my mind of Charlton Heston parting the Red Sea, and the fact that my mother always sang us spirituals when we were kids, and one of her favorites was, "Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, tell old Pharaoh to let my people go." But probably even more, it was my experiences in the civil rights movement when I was in college and graduate school. I wrote my doctoral dissertation and my first book on the Northern students who went south in 1964 and 65 to work on voter registration, teach freedom schools, and put their bodies on the line to make civil rights a reality for Southern Blacks. I had joined Friends of SNCC and CORE as an undergraduate at the University of Washington. And when I began my research as a grad student, I started a large oral history project since there weren't a whole lot of records, and the stories students told were one of my best sources of information. Every single student who worked in the South, whether they were Christian, Jew, agnostic, or atheist, learned how to tell the Moses story at meetings in churches, voter registration rallies, and freedom schools. It was, and I still believe is, the best story to tell to combat America's original sin of slavery, which we're still dealing with today. The legacy of slavery remains, and I can still hear versions of the Moses story in my head as I remember rallies and church services filled with people who were working for their rights and drew strength from the Exodus story. Probably no one has told it better than the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, or John Lewis, but young or old, preacher or politico, everyone had the ability to tell that story and make it live in 1960s America. In the last few months, we've lost some important voices for civil rights in the country, but new ones have also come on the scene with the extraordinary women and men who started Black Lives Matter and other groups. The struggle always continues. Today is the 56th anniversary of Bloody Sunday at the bridge in Selma, and the loss of Representative John Lewis this year, who was the head of SNCC then and who had scars from the beating he took on Edmund Pettus Bridge for the rest of his life. That loss is enormous. But it has been the inspiration for the new bill before Congress, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, proposed by Representative Jim Clyburn, which will expand voting rights for everyone, but especially people of color. This very week, Vernon Jordan, who was field secretary for the NAACP in Georgia in his 20s, and then went on to head the Urban League for the next 20 years, and then went on to be one of the most important movers and shakers in Washington for expanded rights for all. This very week, Jordan died at 85, yet his work also continues. I found this quote from a speech he gave in 2019 to the graduating law school class at Howard University, his alma mater. We live in an age of immediacy, immediate deliveries, immediate communication, but the work of justice takes time. There will be moments of doubt and difficulty, and that means you need to find your rock, your inspiration. And just as the Lord will carry us, we must be prepared to carry one another and lift up one another and our community. It's my deepest hope that we can do that and make our American version of the Moses story complete. And then we can let the Joshua generation begin. And now, as we settle into our service, please know that we are so very glad you're with us this morning.
Now is our time for centering. Our centering hymn this morning is Just as Long as I Have Breath. It was written by Alicia Carpenter, a Unitarian Universalist professional singer and songwriter, set to a tune by Johann Ebeling, a German composer from the 1600s. Alicia's words invite us to say yes to life, to love and truth, but not the innocent plea that says yes to all that is good in our lives. Instead, her words encourage us to say yes in the midst of disappointment, pain, and darkness. It implies when we are able to say yes to life, to love, and truth throughout whatever we encounter, then we have lived well and lived our best. This hymn is an invitation to us to be resilient and to search for peace and strength through valuing the miracle of life in all circumstances, especially the difficult ones. Let's take a moment now to notice our breath. You may close your eyes or settle a gaze upon the sunlight that may be beaming through a window from outside. Or simply take a look at the illumination of your skin below you. Allowing our breath to help us to be present. Let's now join in singing number 6 in our gray hymnal, Just as Long as I Have Breath.
Just as long as I have breath, I must answer yes to life, though
And now let there be a moment when we pause. All prayer. Birds, because I'm learning about them as I take my walks around my neighborhood and here behind the congregation campus. Even as I was listening to the music, a hummingbird was dashing around about my head, just out of reach. There are I've gotten to recognize the herons and eagles, woodpeckers, yes, and the hummingbirds, and yes, the little quail that dance across the road, and the doves that flit away. So for a prayer, I ask you to consider, which bird are you today? Use your imagination. Step outside yourself and sense that who you are is more than human. Let go. Take wing. Fly. And amen.
Go Down Moses, also known as O Let My People Go, is one of the most performed and earliest recorded African American spirituals of all time. It's most notably known for its use by Lady Harriet Tubman in her Underground Railroad missions, where she was known to change the tempo to indicate whether it was safe to come out or not. It was also used during the Civil War era as a rallying anthem for the contrabands at Fort Monroe. Go Down Moses describes events in the Old Testament of the Bible, specifically in the book of Exodus, which we will hear more from Fred, in which God commands Moses to man the release of the Israelites from bondage in Egypt. Please enjoy Cynthia Liggins Thomas's version of Go Down Moses.
When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Thus saith the Lord, bold Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll smite your firstborn dead. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell Pharaoh, let my people go. No more shall they in bondage toil. Let my people go. Let them come out with Egypt's spoil. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Oh, tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Oh, tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Ooh, tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Oh, tell Pharaoh, let my people to let my people go.
I'm here in the Xeriscape Garden in Scottsdale to share James Weldon Johnson's version of the Exodus story. It shows this place because it has bushes, probably not too different from those in that area where the story was set, the kind of bushes that people would imagine when they heard the story of the burning bush. So with the burning bush behind me, let me share Let My People Go by James Weldon Johnson. And God called to Moses from the burning bush. He called in a still, small voice. He said, Moses, Moses. And Moses listened. And he answered and said, Lord, here am I. And the voice in the bush said, Moses, draw not nigh. Take off your shoes, for you are standing on holy ground. And Moses stopped where he stood. And Moses took off his shoes. And Moses looked at the burning bush, and he heard the voice, but he saw no man. Then God said to Moses, and he spoke in a voice of thunder, I am the Lord God Almighty. I am the God of thy fathers. I am the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. And Moses hid his face. And God said to Moses, I've seen the awful suffering of my people down in Egypt. I've watched their hard oppressors, their overseers and drivers. The groans of my people have filled my ears, and I can't stand it no longer. So I've come down to deliver them out of the land of Egypt. And I will bring them out of that land into the land of Canaan. Therefore, Moses, go down into Egypt, and tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. And Moses said, Lord, who am I to make a speech before Pharaoh? For Lord, you know I am slow of tongue. But God said, I will be thy mouth, and I will be thy tongue. Therefore, Moses, go down yonder into Egypt land, and tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. And Moses, with his rod in his hand, went down and said to Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go. And Pharaoh looked at Moses. He stopped still and looked at Moses. And he said to Moses, Who is this Lord? I know all the gods of Egypt, but I know no God of Israel. So go back, Moses, and tell your God I will not let this people go. Poor old Pharaoh. He knows all the knowledge of Egypt, yet he never knew the one and the living God. Poor old Pharaoh. He's got all the power of Egypt, and he's going to try to test his strength with the might of the great Jehovah, with the might of the Lord God of hosts. Lord mighty in battle. And God, sitting up high in his heaven, laughed at poor old Pharaoh. And Pharaoh called the overseers, and Pharaoh called the drivers, and he said, Put heavier burdens still on the backs of the Hebrew children. Then the people chode with Moses, and they cried out, Look here, Moses, you've been to Pharaoh, but look and see what Pharaoh's done to us now. And Moses was troubled in mind. God said, Go again, Moses, you and your brother Aaron, and say once more to Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, let my people go. And Moses and Aaron, with their rods in their hand, worked many signs and wonders. But Pharaoh called for his magic men, and they worked wonders too. So Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not let God's people go. And God rained down plagues on Egypt, plagues of frogs and lice and locusts, plagues of blood and boils and darkness, and other plagues besides. But every time God moved the plague of old Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not let God's people go. And Moses was troubled in mind. Then the Lord said, "Listen, Moses, the God of Israel will not be mocked. Just one more witness to my power. I'll give hard-hearted Pharaoh. This very night, around midnight, I will pass over Egypt. In my righteous wrath, I will pass over and smite their firstborn dead." And God that night passed over, and a cry went up out of Egypt. And Pharaoh rose in the middle of the night, and he sent in a hurry for Moses. And he said, "Go forth from among my people, you and all the Hebrew children. Take your goods and take your flocks and get away from the land of Egypt." And right then, Moses led them out with all their goods and all their flocks. And God went on before, a guiding pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And they journeyed on in the wilderness and came down to the Red Sea in the morning. Oh, in the morning they missed the Hebrew children 400 years. 400 years they'd held them down in Egypt land, held under the driver's lash, working without money and without price. And it might have been Pharaoh's wife that said, "Pharaoh, look what you've done. You let those Hebrew children go. And who's going to serve us now? Who's going to make our bricks and mortar? Who's going to plant and plow our corn? Who's going to get up in the chill of the morning? And who's going to work in the blazing sun? Pharaoh, tell me that." And Pharaoh called his generals, and the generals called the captains, and the captains called the soldiers, and they hitched up all the chariots, 600 chosen chariots of war, and 2,400 horses, and all the chariots were all full of men with swords and shields and shiny spears and battle bows and arrows. And Pharaoh and his army pursued the Hebrew children to the edge of the Red Sea. Now the children of Israel, looking back, saw Pharaoh's army coming. And the rumble of the chariots was like a thunderstorm, and the whirring of the wheels was like a rushing wind, and the dust from the horses made a cloud that darkened the day, and the glittering of the spears was like lightnings in the night. And the children of Israel lost all faith. The children of Israel all lost hope. Deep Red Sea in front of them, Pharaoh's host behind, and they mumbled and grumbled among themselves, "Were there no graves in Egypt?" And they wailed aloud to Moses and said, "Slavery in Egypt was better than to come to die here in the wilderness." But Moses said, stand still, and see the Lord's salvation. For the Lord God of Israel will not forsake his people. The Lord will break the chariots. The Lord will break the horsemen. He'll break great Egypt's sword and shield, the battle bows and arrows. This day he'll make proud Pharaoh know who is the God of Israel. And Moses lifted up his rod over the Red Sea, and God, with a blast of his nostrils, blew the waters apart, and the waves rolled back and stood up in a pile, and he left a path through the middle of the sea, dry as the sands of the desert, and the children of Israel all crossed over onto the other side. When Pharaoh saw them crossing by, he dashed on in behind them. Old Pharaoh got about halfway across, and God unleashed the waters, and the waves rushed back together. And Pharaoh and all his army got lost, and all his host got drowned. And Moses sang, and Miriam danced, and the people shouted for joy. And God led the Hebrew children on till they reached the promised land. Listen, all you sons of Pharaoh. Who do you think can hold God's people when the Lord God himself has said, "Let my people go"? Okay. You need to forget the miracles. You really do. They're fun. You have to really have to forget all the cinema that goes with it. Forget about Charlton Heston. Forget about Yul Brynner, who is Pharaoh. Forget about Cecil B. DeMille jacking everybody out of Egypt. It didn't happen that way. There was no Pharaoh laughing haughtily from a throne. There was no chiseled hero leading teeming hordes. There was no widescreen stereophonic music to accompany them through the wilderness. Whatever happened, and no one knows what happened. It wasn't like that. You see, I know we religious liberals, we kind of get off on debunking miracles. I totally get it. They get out of hand. I understand. We know, like the scholars do, there was no burning bush. There was no magic staff that turned into a snake. There was no slaying of the firstborn. There was no wall of water on each side of the Red Sea. None of that happened. But aside from pleasing our relentless realism, what does that mean, that it didn't happen that way? Nothing, because the power of the story is not in the miracles. It just isn't. It's a story about the birth of a people as a nation. And whatever actually happened, to the people who were there, it was nothing less than miraculous. To those who experienced it, it was life-changing. And their stories, passed down through 3,000 years, passed down through 3,000 Passover meals, were doubtless embellished over time, just like a fish story or a war story or a children's memory of a memory. And of course, the last people to tell the tale are the children who pass it on in their old age. What really interests me in this story is one person, Moses. According to tradition, he is the most powerful prophet in Jewish tradition. He is the only one, according to Jewish tradition, who actually saw God, at least the back of God. It was he who understood directly, ear to ear, not through a dream, what God wanted. Of course, he should be commanding and courageous, but even that's not true. Because if you read the story and put aside everything you've heard before, Moses is a really different person than we imagine him to be. Think about it. First of all, we get the name Moses. Moses is an Egyptian name. He was a foundling, quite literally found in the water, picked up by Pharaoh's daughter, who was then raised in the Egyptian court among the highest ranks, according to the story, with no knowledge of his origins. Now, it is true that according to the story, his sister, his big sister, Miriam, said to the Pharaoh's daughter, I know someone who could care for the baby, nurse him and everything. And it turned out to be Moses' actual mother, but he did not know that. So let's imagine a guy growing up in a family that wasn't his own, not knowing his own family. Perhaps you've met people like that. Sometimes they are a little confused. The lap of luxury and yet an ancestry in danger. That's why, to change the story, Moses kills an overseer for treating a Hebrew badly. Why would he do that? Because the Hebrews are bad people, or at least slaves, and yet he does. Did he sense something? Was it just injustice, or did he have a sense that somehow there was a reason he should care about the Hebrews? So suddenly he is actually betraying his Egyptian family. He is committing a murder, and he knows it because it says, even in the Bible, he looked this way and looked that way to see if anyone was watching. So he also not only kills somebody, he tries to get away with it, and then he runs away to avoid prosecution. We are not talking about a very heroic fellow here. He has already committed a crime, tried to hide it, and has run from the authorities because it turns out he was found out. And he becomes what? A fugitive in a strange land who, after growing up a prince, turns into a shepherd in the wilderness. Now, you got to know that in Egyptian society, a shepherd was the lowest of the low, just above a slave. They handled animals. They were icky. And there he is at the bottom of the social ladder, where he was virtually at the top before. Moses is no hero. He is confused. He's at worst a coward. And then something happens. That burning bush thing. That just serves as a sign that this God, whoever this God is, has decided to pick this person who has never spoken any Hebrew, who does not know his background, who is now a fugitive criminal from his Egyptian authorities. This person who is now a shepherd working in the wilderness, dusty, dirty. This person is going to lead the Hebrews from bondage. And of course, God says, I'm going to get you to do this. And what does Moses say? Not me, man. No. I am not the guy. Your God, that's cool. I am not your guy. I can't talk in public. I'm not good at this. He even says, even if I go and say, God sent me, why would they believe me? But God is not impressed with any of the excuses. Moses tries to weasel out at every opportunity. They will not believe me or listen to my voice. And according to the poem, God says, I'll be your voice and tongue. According to the Bible, he sends Aaron to do that duty. Moses can't get out of the job. He has been drafted, conscripted. He has been told, here is your job. You don't get a choice. This is hardly the hallowed Heston going off from Hollywood. So off he goes. Moses, the cowering, stuttering liberator. I like this Moses. I can relate to him. What has all this to do with James Weldon Johnson's poem and that story in this larger context of the African-American experience? The similarity is apparent to everyone, black and white, that the story of the Exodus was a story of being liberated from slavery, which was a story that enslaved peoples learned despite the enslaving population trying to keep it from them. It's impossible not to know. So that's why I really want to focus on the way God speaks in the poem, which is taken directly from the spiritual. He says to Moses, go down, Moses. Go down into Egypt. And I was struck by that going down. What does that mean? I think it means more than come down out of the mountains and come down away from the burning bush. Sure, Egypt was flat and the mountains were high, but I think there's more to this notion of going down into Egypt. Perhaps to go down has other meanings, moral meanings, spiritual meanings, prophetic meanings. And I believe this is the key to the power of the Exodus for you and me today. For instance, let's take the term go down as a get involved, to get down to business. You don't go up to business, you get down to business, you get down to basics, you get down into the details, you go down in the weeds. And that's exactly what Moses does. When he gets back to Egypt, he doesn't stop and visit his family, to our knowledge. He just goes right to Pharaoh, no diplomacy, no working it out, no meeting with the elders, no organizing of anyone, not like John Lewis at all. No, it says Moses with his rod in his hand went down and said to Pharaoh, let my people go. Doesn't explain, doesn't try to rationalize it, just makes the demand. Moses went down to Egypt and got down to business, even though doing so brought him even lower. He spoke truth to power, it is true. And in so doing, he risked the wrath of Pharaoh, who had absolute power over everyone's life. And then, even when he did that, he was criticized by the people he was saving because the Pharaoh did what? He made their job harder. They had to go and get their own straw. They had to work twice as hard to do the work they were already assigned. And so it says the people chode with Moses, as in chiding, as in criticized. They humiliated Moses for getting in their way. Gee, Moses, you're going to make our lives better, but now it's worse. Haven't you ever done that? When you did a good deed and it got worse and people looked at you like, thanks a lot. Gee, aren't you wonderful? And they cried out, look here, Moses, you've been to Pharaoh, but look and see what Pharaoh's done to us now. I don't know about you, but I might say, okay, I'm backing up now. Obviously, it didn't work, but he didn't. At least the story says he kept going. He kept going down. Think of those around us today, because I want to check another sense of going down. I want you to think of the people who are down at the bottom of our social ladder, who get down on their knees to wash the floor, who pick up the garbage, who work in the nursing homes. I want to think of the parents who are juggling childcare and jobs in a whole new and unrelenting way. I want to think about the hard work done by all those who have to work during COVID and they have to bring themselves closer to that risk every day. I want to think about those for whom being ill or old or poor means they work all day just to stay alive. Anyone tells me that poor is lazy doesn't understand poverty. Being poor is the hardest job in the world. You don't get time off because your belly is hungry every day. I want you to think about also those of us who are more fortunate, because sometimes every one of us will have to get down in the mire and the muck and do the hard work. Ever unplugged a sink with a plunger? No fun, but it has to be done. Some of the tasks of life are just plain hard and thankless, like scrubbing the kitchen floor or cleaning the toilet. We all hate it, but we do it because we know that it has to be done, and blowing it off is not the responsible thing to do. So I want to think about going down as in doing your best, doing the hard work, doing the work no one else wants to do, but we all got to do. When God said, go down, Moses, and he tried to resign, God would not let him quit. Once you are responsible for a job, you have to see it through. We hear lots of talk about rights all the time, especially by our libertarian friends. And I get it. We don't want to see our rights lost. And of course, we want to see those without their rights get their rights. But I'd like to hear some talk about responsibility to go along with rights. We all have rights, but we all have responsibilities that go with those rights. I'd like to hear some conversation about that. Let's say you have the right to bear arms. I do not dispute that. You have the right to vote. And we need to make that more obvious to everyone. We have the right to free speech. We have the right to reproductive choice, just to name four. But I hear little talk about responsibility. You all remember Uncle Ben and Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. With rights come responsibility too. What we have in this story is the call to responsibility. God is going to hold Pharaoh responsible for what Pharaoh did, but he's also going to hold Moses responsible for the job of getting it done. What about the responsibilities that say come with those rights? You want to bear arms? I grew up around people who get firearms, but in my day, the NRA was about teaching you how to be responsible for your weapon and how to use it responsibly and how to store it responsibly. Now it's all about your right to have it, not your responsibility to take that right carefully. You want to vote? I think that's great. We need to expand voting rights. But if you're going to be responsible as a citizen, you better learn the issues. But why are we not teaching civics anymore? Why do so few people know how government operates? Why have we neglected that? And why do we not hold more people responsible for learning that? You want freedom of speech? It's guaranteed. But then don't yell fire in a figurative theater by upsetting people or starting a riot. And that's real easy in the internet. It's time for people to pipe down unless they have something that they're willing to take responsibility for saying. And tough as it is to say in this crowd, you have reproductive choice, especially if you're a woman. And the real goal of the nation should not be to guarantee a right to an abortion, but to make it possible for you to make every choice, including to have children when you want them, if you want them. And that abortion is only one part of the right to control your own body. That's why we need to teach sexuality to boys and girls, to empower women so that no means no. We need to be able to hold men responsible for their actions. And freedom, therefore, of all kinds involves the hard work of taking responsibility for the rights we exercise. It does not fall like manna from heaven. It is the fruit of work, of effort. Freedom, whatever it is for grown-ups. And we have very few grown-ups leading our country right now. But that's my complaint for the morning. I got to get back to Moses now. I just had to say those few things. To go down is to do the work that freedom demands. To go down is to come down from the ivory tower, or from the safety of the suburbs, or from the serenity of the hour of worship, and get into the mucky reality of life. Liberty and justice are not found far from the crowd, but in the midst of it. But there's even more. There's even more. To go down is to be brought down. And that is what the story really teaches spiritually. Moses was a stranger to his own people. He grew up Egyptian, but was a Hebrew, a word which has roots in the language it came from for slave. To be Hebrew is to be enslaved. His behavior was anything but heroic. He was a fugitive from justice. He hid in the desert. But God chooses Moses, and we have to ask why. Because he was the right person, because of those events. Because he was disgraced, because he was a fugitive, because he was a criminal, because he was a lowly shepherd. He was about as far down the status ladder as you can get in Egyptian society. He was a bumpkin, a rube, a hick, a hillbilly. He was nobody. And he stuttered. He's the last person any of us would choose to lead a people out of slavery. This irony that God chose the most unqualified person is the important lesson. That's why the real Moses wasn't going to be Charlton Heston. The real Moses was a plain, unimpressive man. He had no charisma, no poise, no presence, no sophistication, no air of authority. He was pathetic. And that's why he was chosen, because God chose Moses because he was the least qualified leader. Tradition says the miracles are to remind us that Israel did not free itself, but God did. But perhaps Moses, being this pathetic creature, is yet another proof that one person is not the key to everything. Take the lowest person of the low, and you can make that person into a leader if you are behind the truth and you have righteousness alongside. But there is another, slightly more subtle reason why Moses should be the one. Because the lowest understand everything better. Those at the bottom can see more clearly than we at the top. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Protestant pastor during the Second World War, who dared to take his faith into action and was imprisoned and eventually executed for opposing the Nazi regime, wrote, "Oppression is known only by the oppressed. The oppressed, therefore, are always those who lead us to freedom, not only themselves, but the rest of us." That's why the movement for Black lives belongs to them as leaders. And we as white people need to be good followers. This is not our movement to lead. It is our movement to follow. It's why women have to tell us where we need to go in the world of gender justice. And we men need to listen and follow. Because those who oppress only rarely see oppression. we are likely to say, oh, it's the natural order of things, or that, oh, well, they're better off than they would be under other circumstances. Or sometimes they simply admit some win and some lose. But it never occurs to the fortunate and the privileged that there is something wrong with their fortune and privilege until the oppressed start complaining. And yes, instantly there is resistance because we are all Pharaoh to our own privilege. In the words of someone else, freedom is never granted, it must be won. Well, as regards Moses, he had to be among the lowest to understand freedom in his heart. That's my point. That's the point of the story. Moses went down, not down the hill, not deep into meditation. He went down into the midst of oppression as one of the oppressed. He went down, slid down, got as low as a person can go. And that is when he became a prophet. Along a road I used to travel years ago, I would see a man of uncertain years dressed in grimy clothes, wearing a too big knit cap, smiling a toothless smile. Every day he did the same thing, push or ride a rusty old bicycle through the neighborhood. He was pitiful. There was a man who used to walk down my street in Grand Rapids, who stuffed his clothing with plastic bags, who had a wild grin on his face, and frequently his pants were wet with his own urine. These are pathetic and pitiful people. But I have to admit, they probably saw life more clearly in some ways than I did. Pity is not what we need to feel. It is awareness of our lack of pity, we who are not like that. Let's remember, pity is what bystanders felt when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. What a pathetic sight. Pity is what people thought when little brown Gandhi first got up to speak in India. What did he have to say? And wasn't Nelson Mandela rather pitiful and pathetic when he walked out of Robben Island, thin and old? But if legend and history teach us anything, it is that these are the ones who will save us. Those on the lowest rungs of the ladder truly hold the rest of us up. Those who make the bricks, pick the cotton, clean the filth, diaper the children, care for the sick, cook the food for the poor, smile the toothless smile, they are the ones who will liberate all of us. And if that bothers you, good. It is time for us to relinquish, we who live in a condition of privilege and fortune, to relinquish our moral superiority and say that if we desire freedom, if we wish to be liberated from the Pharaoh of our times, it will not come from us. It will come from a Moses that we find coming out of a soup kitchen, walking out of a homeless shelter, or perhaps pushing her shopping cart, flotsam fluttering royally in the breeze as we pass by in our cars. With that paradox in mind, I leave you this morning and invite Katie to lead us in our closing hymn.
Our closing hymn is I Know I Can. It's written in the gospel style and was a collaborative effort between the composer Jeannie Gunn, lyricist Reverend Dennis Hamilton, and arranger Mark Frund. This hymn comes from a point of darkness and troubles that reaches for hope, prayer, and a strong will, a great closing to the message we just heard. Thank you, Reverend Fred. Jeannie Gunn has said that the melody came to her in about 20 minutes one evening, which she said rarely happens, but when it does, she trusts it completely. May this hymn be as inspiring for us to sing as it was for Jeannie to write. Please join in singing number 1015 in our teal hymnal if you have it, I Know I Can.
be dark with storms, and burdens weigh my heart. Though troubles wait at every turn, I know I can go on. My sorrow heals my soul, and burdens make me strong. Though trouble waits at every turn, I know I can go on. My sister in my heart, my brother in my song. Though troubles wait at every turn, I know I can go on. And though the journey is long, the destination is near. Though trouble waits at every turn, I know I can go on. So brothers, take my hand, and sisters, sing my song. When hope awaits at every turn, I know we will go on.
Some closing words from John Lewis, who, as Mary Rothschild observed, was among those present on Bloody Sunday 56 years ago today, and yet remained eternally hopeful. He wrote, "You are a light. You are the light. Never let anyone, any force or person, dampen, dim, or diminish your light. If you shine like a beacon for all to see, then the poetry of all the great dreamers and philosophers is yours to manifest in a nation, a community, and a beloved community that is finally at peace with itself." And now I invite Mary Rothschild to close our worship by extinguishing the chalice.
As we close our service today, I want to remind you to stay to join our congregational conversation for updates about what's happening here at VUU outside of our Zoom services. And now please join me in saying our words to extinguish the chalice. Though we extinguish the chalice, our connection to each other and this community remains. May its light guide us this week as we walk the path of justice, speak words of love, and fill our world with compassion until we meet again.